Good morning. This is Kelsey from Kels Reads Things at Anna Porter Public Library in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day, and today I'm here and ready to discuss with you A Vow So Bold and Deadly. Now, this is the third and supposedly final installment in the Cursebreaker series by Bridget Kammerer. This is a young adult fantasy romance a little bit series, and it's definitely a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. Now, for those of you who have not finished book two, I'm going to do a quick synopsis of this book and kind of just a very conditioned down plot explanation, and maybe discuss just a little bit of what occurred in book two. After that, I'm going to be discussing everything from book three a little more in detail, so you might want to come back to this video at a later time once you've finished book two and three. Okay, so for the general synopsis of book two, at this point, Gray is aware of who is the rightful heir, and he is afraid that if he gets that information out, that Ren, the rightful ruler, is going to have him destroyed, have him killed, because magic at this point is pretty much illegal in the realms of Emberfall as well as in Shallow. Ren was cursed for centuries by a sorceress who turned him into a beast. I believe it was every fall or something. Because of that, Ren is extremely cautious and hateful when it comes to any kind of magical abilities. And because of that, there is quite a bit of strain that is caused, because Gray knows who the rightful heir is, and he also has magic. But Ren is not aware of that, and he is keeping that from him. So Gray has kind of been on the run. He meets up with Leah Mara, who is the first daughter of the queen of Shallow. Her name is Karis Lurin. That is her mother. Karis Lurin is the ruler. And Leah Mara wants peace between Emberfall and Shallow, just as Gray would be fine with peace as well. But unfortunately, that is not happening in this juncture, nor in this climate. Because these two countries have been against each other for a long time, but Shallow believes that they need to attack because they are desperate for resources, and Emberfall is at this point blockading resources. Harper is just trying to cope with everything that is happening, with everything that goes down between Ren and Gray in the second book, and she really discovers that her loyalties and where they lie, she struggles with that throughout book two and book one. We don't really get hardly any perspective from Harper at all, if any perspective from her at all in book two, because that primarily focuses on Gray and Leah Mara and their story. So then, when we get to book three, we follow the perspectives of all four, including Ren, Harper, Leah Mara, and Gray, as they're all preparing to battle, because at the end of book two, Gray ends up saddling up with Shallow. He ends up what's it called? He ends up allying himself with Shallow, and Karis Lurin is eventually taken care of because she's very cruel and she would only cause more chaos. So Leah Mara is now the rightful ruler, and Gray gave Ren a warning of, I believe it was 60 days before, or was it 90 days? It was either 60 or 90 days before he was going to attack Emberfall so that Shallow could have their resources that they need. And that's kind of where this story picks up, about the two different sides preparing not only for war, but also grappling with each other and the relationships to each other, primarily Harper and Ren, and Gray and Ren. So it's honestly heavily a character book, and it's also about Gray not only dealing with his relationship with Ren, but also the relationship with these soldiers that now have to answer to him in Shallow, who are distrustful of him, because they're also distrustful of magic. And that's the general premise, or at least what mostly occurs in book two and transitioning into book three. So now I'm going to give my fancy plot point of book 3. So if you have not finished book 2, now is a good time to wish me goodbye and come back at a later time. To rewatch this video, that is, if you have time. As our 4 main characters rise to power, they also encounter struggles that ensue both in Silas Shallow as well as Emberfall for our young, somewhat inexperienced rulers. They will all be put to the ultimate test. Will brothers come to blows? Will peaceful Liamara be able to guide her kingdom with compassion against her argumentative sister's protests? Will Ren ever gain back control over Emberfall and ultimately Lilith? Or will she take over everything before he even has the chance to confront Grey? Pressures are presenting themselves from all angles as our young heroes combat forces against and even within their own kingdoms. So again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of struggles, not only in relationships, but there's also power struggles in this book. Liamara questions her leadership as it's extremely different compared to her mother's leading style. Ren was raised to be a ruler, but he is grappling with the mistakes from his past and his most recent mistakes. And if you've read book 2, then you know what I'm referring to. Harper is also grappling with whether she's making some of the same supposed mistakes that her mother and her parents in general did by staying with Ren versus having gone with her brother who went with Grey to Silas Shallow. And poor Grey he's just all over the place, trying to earn the loyalties of the soldiers, trying to decipher what he wants to do about the situation with Ren, dealing with lots of anger and feelings of betrayal. It's just a lot. There's a lot of emotions and a lot of power struggles that are occurring in this novel specifically. It's very much a character-driven novel, so if that's not really your jam, it may not be your favorite book. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and just discuss a few of my overall thoughts of the book. So, it was not the worst conclusion to a trilogy I've read, but it certainly was not the most satisfying. I felt like there was a lot of content that was kind of just left for the reader to interpret what would happen next, and that's all fine and well, but there was an extremely new, well, it's not really new, but an extreme threat that is occurring by the end of book 3, and it's not really touched on at all, except for someone has been assigned to talk to the people and try to convince them that magic isn't their enemy and that it's not something they should rebel against necessarily. So I was disappointed that that was still an intense issue and it hasn't even really been highlighted or touched on, and we're supposed to not get another book at all. So I would like to see a resolution for that. However, again, sometimes authors end books with the reader to interpret what will happen next, so maybe you can actually appreciate that about this ending. I just don't like when plot points are left unresolved. That's just me. So I'm hoping that we eventually see at least a 4th edition to this series. I know a lot of readers felt the same way according to reviews on Goodreads. I haven't checked Amazon really, but Goodreads is a pretty decent and reliable resource when it comes to figuring out what the general populace thinks of a book. Not that you should only read books that have good reviews. Just because a book has a lot of great reviews doesn't mean it's for you. And just because a book has a lot of negative reviews doesn't mean that it's not for you. But I do like to use Goodreads as a means to help me even formulate my own opinions or help me to express how I feel about something. Because sometimes people who do reviews are really good about putting my own thoughts in words, and I appreciate that, Goodreads. So, I talked about how the book concluded, and now I'm going to talk about how it started. It was very slow at first, with very little action taking place. The first half primarily focuses on Ren and Harper trying to mend and manage their very strange relationship at this point in time. While Grey is preparing for war and grappling with his own responsibilities and his conscience in terms of his feelings for Ren, and Liamara is also struggling with her place in the world. and trying to figure out a good balance of how to be a compassionate leader while also being an authoritative leader. You, I know there were a lot of people, readers, who were not actually a fan of Leomara in this book because they thought that she didn't take enough action, that she was too hesitant. But as someone who is a young leader, I am 30 years old and I'm the director of my library in Gatlinburg, and I've only been in this position for 2 years since I was about 28 years old. So, being someone who was actually 10 years Leomara's senior, taking over just a library, I can't imagine what it would be like to then be in charge of an entire kingdom at 18 years old. So I think some readers are a little bit too harsh, in my opinion, on Leomara. I think she really grew, actually, and by the end, she was a formidable leader who is extremely confident. So I'm not really sure why people feel that way. I mean, again, she is a more sensitive, more compassionate, and caring character, but that doesn't mean that she didn't become a great leader. And again, 18 years old, and I'm a director at 30, and I gotta say, sometimes running things is not easy. It's not an easy job, but you know what? It's pretty rewarding. All that being said, yes, it was an extremely character driven book, and because of that, I personally felt like all of the characters really grew by the end. Some people would disagree with me again, especially in terms of Leomara and even Ren, but I personally believe that they both grapple with their own weaknesses as well as their own trials and uh, go above them. That's just my opinion. So now I'm going to talk about the writing style just a little bit. I especially liked that since this book had four different perspectives, that Bridget Kemmerer is very talented at giving individual characters their own voice. I had very little trouble transitioning between characters because of that. I mean, their names were always at the top of the chapter, but just knowing these characters as well as she did and having their personalities as fleshed out as they were, it just made things so much easier, again, to switch perspectives. So if you struggle with that, I don't think it'll really be a problem with this book. The writing style in general was just compelling and deep and definitely struck some chords in my heart. I think that every character was extremely realistic. As I said, some readers are very harsh on characters who are not just gung ho, sassy, and strong, and there were a lot of weaknesses portrayed in this book, but I like that because it makes the characters feel more real and more genuine, and they all still grew, in my opinion, by the end of the series. So overall, I think Bridget Kemmerer did a great job with that. This book, I think, is also a wonderful testament to those of us who have suffered with PTSD, and it does a really good job of exposing how trauma affects our decision making. One thing I really enjoyed about the characters, especially in terms of Gray and Ren, is they showed a lot of similarities and parallels between their characters. Isaac, who I don't think I've even mentioned, he's a character who's like a scarver or something, and I don't even know how to begin to explain what he is, but he's kind of like a bat creature or something. Pointed out that they are both capable of brutality when cornered, Gray and Ren, and this remains kind of a theme throughout the book, determining whether they're going to be a human or a monster. Are they going to be forgiving or ruthless? And the last thing I'm going to say is just like a slight spoiler, but if you've read book 2, then you already know this information. So Gray is the rightful ruler, right? That's why he ran away in book 2. He knew, he was aware that he was the rightful ruler. He was also aware that he has magical capabilities, and he didn't want that to be an issue, obviously. He didn't want to die, thanks to Gray, because of that. But there was nothing to solidify that he actually was the rightful heir. And I'm pretty certain that he was born out of wedlock. And in most fantasy worlds, they're usually a little bit old school. Typically, Ren would still be the rightful ruler. And again, there was no means of explaining that, or about whether it was proven or not that Gray was the firstborn of the king, so that was a little bit confusing and wasn't really explained. Also, Ren was raised to be a ruler, whereas Gray was raised to be his soldier. So Ren has a lot more savvy when it comes to knowing how to basically manage and juggle not only protecting the kingdom, but the politics of it. So that'll be interesting to have Gray, who has absolutely no experience dealing with diplomats and laws and everything, kind of take over that role. I kind of wish they could have just ended up ruling together in the end. So I need answers, and that's another reason why I want there to be a fourth book. Not only to explain how the issues of the uprising is taking place, but also, like, I would love to see Gray and Ren depend on each other to solidify their new roles. And it's clear by the end of the book that that is what's going to happen, but I would just love to read about it, Bridget, please. Okay, so now I'm going to finally just mention one or two quotes that really stuck out for me in the book, particularly in terms of Harper and Ren's relationship, because that was something that definitely needed to be discussed and touched on. So, yeah, it was a major theme in the book, so I'm going to go ahead and get with it. On page 215, this is on Harper in her brain. She's thinking at this time, it's from her perspective, and she better understands Ren, and so this is what is actually said. Maybe it's the realization that we both bring different experiences and different expectations to every challenge we face. Those cards that fate deals. He's the tortured prince, and a million choices layered on a million other choices got him here. I'm the broken girl from the streets of D.C., and I got here the same way. Maybe my father thought he was doing the best he could. Maybe my mother thought the same. And that's why she stayed. Maybe that's all Ren is doing. And on page 213, which is just like 2 pages before that thought from Harper, she actually says this quote to Ren as they're trying to kind of mend their relationship. I'm realizing that I got so caught up in the poor choices you made, I forgot that you know how to make good ones. Okay, and so those are the only 2 quotes that I'm going to discuss, because otherwise I just feel like I'm giving too much away, and I'm really trying to avoid that for future book review videos. So overall, those are my major thoughts and opinions when it comes to the 3rd book in the Cursebreaker series. And overall, I believe I gave it 4 stars because, again, there were a few issues that were left out in the open, and there were a few things that I felt weren't exactly answered or explained as thoroughly as I would like. So again, I would love to see another book in the series. It is supposedly finished at this time, but we will see. Thank you so much to everyone who watched my book review video today. Next week, I will likely be doing a book review of Seance Tea Party, which is an adorable middle grade graphic novel about a little girl named Laura, who is very into spooky things and is having a hard time with growing up, who meets a ghostly friend who helps her kind of find her way and become herself. Alrighty, thank you again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next week for another book talk. Have a wonderful day.